Hi, and as promised, this is my second video this week. I said when I first got the Z8, there was so much to talk about with this camera, a lot for me to learn, that I was going to try to do 2 videos a week. Well, at least for this week, this is my second video. And first thing I want to talk about is something I mentioned in the last video that came out a couple days ago, and that was in reference to the play button. And the play button on the Z8 and the Z9 is in the lower right of the back of the camera. On the other Nikon digital cameras that I own, it's on the upper left. And I indicated that it was difficult for me to get used to this on the lower right because, muscle memory, I just always go to the top left to look at some of my images. But I was shooting a job a couple days after I shot that video, an event, and I was using on-camera flash with the SB910, and I was having a little difficulty with my batteries. I thought they were fully charged, but it seemed like the recycle time was a little long, and I was worried that the flash wasn't firing all the time. It was an award ceremony, and I had to take a picture like every, 5-6 seconds. There was enough available light so that if the flash didn't fire, the exposures would have been okay. But I was just a little worried, so I kept checking the images as I shot them. I had, like I said, maybe 5 or 6 seconds between images. So I would take a shot and just press the button on the lower right of the camera, the playback button. And I realized that that is the ideal position for that button, because using this 24-70 lens, I'm always supporting the lens with my left hand. My right hand, of course, is on the shutter release, and then I could easily, with my thumb, just reach down and press the playback button. So it was really quick, and the images come up instantly. Everything on this camera is fast, turns on fast. Even when it goes to sleep, light pressure on the shutter release, and it's back instantly. So I changed my mind. I was wrong. As far as the location of the playback button, I like it much better on this camera. Now, I did look into the Z6, and I cannot change the button on the lower right, which is the frame rate button. I cannot change that for playback, but I'm going to keep the playback button on the Z8 where it is and not try to move it to the upper left. It just works out really good. So sometimes, until you're in an actual working situation, that's when you realize what customization you may need. You may think, as I did previously, that it would have been easier just to go to the upper right, but then I have to take my hand off the lens, and it's just quicker using my right hand and thumb to press that playback button. Another thing with respect to my previous video, in that video, I said that I had set the Z8 up for release button to use dial. And basically what that means, and I gave a couple examples, basically what that means is I can press the exposure compensation button, let go, and then turn the rear dial for exposure compensation. And that works with other buttons as well, the autofocus button, just press and release. And then once you do that, you set the exposure compensation that you want, then you just put light pressure on the shutter release to lock it in. Well, someone responded to my last video and said you could also do that with the other Z cameras. Now, I've owned the Z6 since February of 2019, and I never realized that. There's so much on these cameras. I mean, the Z8 even more so than the Z6. There's more customizable buttons and so forth. But that goes to show, I mean, it's over 4 years that I own that camera, and I never knew that. And I did read Tom Hogan's book, his ebook, when I first got that camera, but maybe it's something I forgot about or it wasn't important to me at that time. So I did go back and I set my Z6 up that way. So another correction from my last video. Now, I also had a question from someone from my last video who asked, have I used flash with the camera? And I have. I've used both on-camera SB910, Nikon SB910 on camera for some of these events I shot, and I also used studio flash for some headshots that I recently did. Worked out great in those situations. Now, one thing to keep in mind is custom setting D8. Custom setting D8, which is under the shooting/display menu, allows you to set the camera for show effects of settings. And what that means, and that's how I normally have it set. What that means is as your exposure may change, if you change white balance, if you change your picture control, you will see the effects of that in the viewfinder and on the LCD. It's great. But if you're using studio flash, now normally my exposure with studio flash is 1/125th of a second at 5.6. Okay, I have several lights set up, and I don't want to pick up any of the room light. And that 1/25th of 5.6 is going to make the image in the viewfinder very dark if I'm set for show effects of settings. The image, if I wasn't using studio flash at those settings, 1/125th of 5.6, and by the way, the ISO is 64 that I use for studio lighting, the image through the viewfinder is going to be dark. What I need to do is change that custom setting D8 is to adjust for ease of viewing. And that will give me a bright image in the viewfinder. Now, in the other situation, at an event with the SB910 mounted on the camera, I normally, if the room light is bright and I'm also trying to pick up some of that room light, I will leave it for show effects of settings. However, you also have the option, when you set it for show effects of settings, to have it set for either always, so it'll always show the effects of settings even with flash on, or only when flash is not used. So that's a good setting. Let's say you're in a darkened room, you want to shoot at, let's say, a 60 at the 5.6, but that's going to give you, if you weren't using flash, a very underexposed image. But if you have it set that way, when you turn the flash on, the camera knows, and it will give you a nice bright view through the viewfinder. So you've got a lot of options when using flash. And the SB910 works fine with this camera. To make any adjustments, however, you have to do them on the flash. I believe with the SB5000, you could actually make exposure compensations, flash exposure compensation, and other settings on the flash through the camera menus. But I'm so used to using the SB910 that I'm fine with making those adjustments on the flash itself. So to answer that question, I've used flash, have no issues with it. It works fine. And I continue to learn more and more about this camera. Now, previously in one of my Z8 videos, I showed some images that I had taken in my backyard, actually from my sliding patio door to my deck where I have a bird feeder, several bird feeders set up. And what I'm going to do in my next video is go into detail on that, show you how it was set up, and show some images with the Z8 set for DX mode with my 70-200 2.8 and the 2-time teleconverter. I've showed a lot of images with that combination before, but I just want to show you how the setup is, where my position is, and I got a lot more images this time. In the video that I did on this camera, after a week of use, I mentioned how many images I had shot at the wildlife refuge with it set for 20 frames a second. Well, I've scaled that back now for my backyard stuff, either 8 or 10 frames a second, because shooting at 20 frames a second, you really end up with a lot of images, a lot of editing to do. However, you can see a difference between 10 and 20 frames. You get a lot more images to choose from, and they all are, especially when the bird is moving, they all are a little different. So for birds in flight, I think I would continue to use 20 frames a second. For more stationary birds, such as I find in my backyard, I think I'm going to stick to maybe 8 or 10 frames a second. So if you have any questions on this, I hope I explained this whole flash thing well enough. If I didn't, please ask me a question, send me an email, leave a comment in the comments below. I will respond. I don't pretend to know everything about this camera. I'm learning with you. And if anything I said here you feel is wrong, please correct me. Like I said, I'm still learning, and I hope I'm helping you learn more about the Nikon Z8. So if you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel. I usually come out with a new video every Wednesday morning at 11 a.m. So I will talk to you next time.